Good morning, and a warm welcome to our viewing public and members of the media. Thank you for joining with us. I am Kavita Supram, Corporate Communications Officer at the Ministry of Finance. Today, the Honourable Colm Imbert, Minister of Finance, will be addressing finance-related matters. We will be taking questions later on from the media. So, without further ado, I will now pass you over to the Honourable Colm Imbert, Minister of Finance.
Good morning. Kavita, who do we have with us this morning?
We have Express, Newsday, Guardian, AZP, and TV6.
So CNC3 is not with us.
Guardian.
But Guardian is part of that. Okay. Okay. Can I just get a confirmation that the media is hearing me clearly? Could a member of the media please indicate that you are hearing me clearly?
Yes, I hear.
We are. Thank you very much. Okay, today I just want to talk about two things. Unfortunately, I have to attend a board meeting of the Andean Development Bank a little later today. So this press conference will run for about 45 minutes. I am going to raise two issues, and I would ask that allow me to complete my statements on the two issues, and then let's go to questions. The first issue is in the newspapers today, where yesterday we were informed by Moody's Investor Services that they have improved Trinidad and Tobago's credit rating outlook from stable to positive. Now, the significance of this is that in order to get an upgrade in the actual rating number itself, one has to go through this pathway in terms of your outlooks. If, for example, your outlook is negative, you have to get your outlook to stable, and then you get it to positive, and then you're on your way towards an upgrade in the actual rating number itself. So this is a very significant development. The Moody's press release issued yesterday, sometime after 6 p.m., is on the Moody's website. And essentially, if I can just summarize what Moody's said, positive outlook that they have given us reflects improved prospects that Trinidad and Tobago's fiscal consolidation momentum, triggered by energy price windfall gains, will be more sustained than projected in Moody's baseline scenario. Now, this is very important. Those words, will be more sustained than projected in Moody's baseline scenario. Because the last time we were rated by Moody's, they had a somewhat pessimistic outlook on Trinidad and Tobago because of the fact that there was a view that the windfall that we received from oil prices and gas prices during COVID would not be sustained. But now, based on a number of different things, Moody's has indicated that they believe our momentum, fiscal consolidation momentum, will be more sustained than they originally thought. And they made another statement, a sustained return to economic expansion after several years of contraction, supported by the projected increase in oil production starting this year, would also enhance economic resiliency, as would continued diversification efforts in the non-energy sector. The government's adopted structural, fiscal, and economic reforms are reflected in an improving institutions and governance strength assessment as a driver of this action. I would not go through the entire press release. It's there for anybody who wishes to access it, but this is a very positive development for Trinidad and Tobago because it demonstrates that our approach to fiscal and monetary policy is working, and that the rating agency has recognized that we are on the right track, and that the momentum that we received, the boost that we got in 2022 will be continued into 2023 and beyond. And I might add, just by the way, that the fiscal outturn up to the end of June is quite encouraging. We had thought that by the end of June, we would have a fairly sizable deficit, but that is not so. At the end of May, we were in surplus, and we expect by the end of June, because we got quite significant revenue in June, we will also be in surplus. There are 3 months to go, so we will see what happens in the rest of the year, but I do not think that we are going to post a sizable fiscal deficit this year at all, as originally thought at the time of the mid-year. I think we're going to do quite well in 2023, as we also did in 2022 from a financial perspective. The second issue is the item that is gaining or has gained media attention. And I have noticed that the newspaper commentary, not just from the newspapers themselves, but also from external commentators, would lead you to the conclusion that this was an action of the Minister of Finance on his own. This is not so. Like any order that any government minister has the authority to publish, these instruments go through a pathway. They go before cabinet for cabinet's deliberation and are done on the basis of a cabinet minute, which is a decision of cabinet, and are then vetted, prepared by the Attorney General, who would give the final sign-off on these matters. As, for example, in the case of the public health restrictions, where orders are being issued every month, sometimes every week, that those were not actions of the Minister of Health per se. Those were actions of the government, which are carried out by the relevant minister. You know, other ministers would publish orders under the Petroleum Act, under the Education Act, under the Port Authority Act, and so on. So that an order of this nature is really a decision of the government. Now, I thought it necessary to give some background. The procurement legislation, which was demanded for a period of many, many years, has some constraints in it which I don't think are fully understood. The procurement law and the regulations and the guidelines as published at this point in time require that whether you are doing open competitive bidding for a service, a public body, whether it is a ministry, a state enterprise, whatever, who wishes to, a department, judiciary as an example, who wishes to procure goods and services, if they're engaging in open competitive bidding or limited selection, where you would have a list of qualified suppliers that you would invite. So whereas in open competitive tendering, publishing in newspapers and on websites and so on, for limited bidding, you would have a list of pre-qualified suppliers. You might have 5 or 6, you invite them. And then you do your evaluation, you make your selection, and eventually it leads to an award of a contract to provide goods and services. The current procurement law requires that whether you are doing open competitive bidding or whether you are doing selective tendering, you must allow a period of 20 working days for bidders to submit their bids. That's a month, because it's 20 working days. After those 20 working days have elapsed, so you issue an invitation to tender, whether it is an invitation for open tendering or whether it's an invitation for selective tendering, you issue this invitation to tender to supply goods and services. You have to give tenderers 1 month, whether it is open or whether it is limited. After that 1 month, it needs to be evaluated by the evaluation committee, which again, there are guidelines with respect to the composition of the evaluation committee. The evaluation committee, having done its evaluation and recommended a particular contractor or supplier to be awarded the contract to provide the goods and services, it then has to go to another advisory committee, which is a feature of the law, a PDAC, advisory committee. They then examine what the evaluation committee is recommending. They look at the process, they look at invitation to tender, and then they would make a recommendation to the public body, as I say, whether it's a ministry. So this would be the accounting officer, would be the permanent secretary, would make the award, or if it's a state enterprise like UDICOT, their board or their CEO would make the award. So you have to put the tenders out for 1 month, then go through an evaluation process. Let's say you fast track that, and you do all of that in 1 week. So in a 1 month, 1 week, you then have to allow something called a standstill period, which is in the law as well. And the law says that the minimum standstill period must be 10 working days. So that is another 2 weeks. So that with the best will in the world and the most efficient procurement system and the most qualified and competent and committed people within a ministry or department on statutory authority and so on, it's going to take you virtually 2 months to award a contract from the time you start. That's the law. That's the law as it stands. So there are exceptions to this. There are, prior to the publication of the 2 orders that I will talk about, there were exceptions for legal services, medical services, and so on, financing for the national budget. In May, the Ministry of Finance received a request from the judiciary via the Attorney General. And the request was as follows: that the judiciary has to be very careful about how it goes about selecting suppliers and contractors to provide goods and services for reasons of confidentiality in particular. And the information that came to us in May was that there was a jury trial that was due to take place towards the end of May, and that the judiciary in the normal way had to procure accommodation for the jury, because the jury has to be sequestered, has to be kept away from the public so that they're not influenced by the public or by persons associated with the matter, with the trial itself. So they had to procure accommodation for the jury, transportation to and from the court for the jury, meals, and other things that this group, this jury would require. And they had not yet, because the Procurement Act was proclaimed on the 26th of April, so this is about a month later. The judiciary had not yet been able to get their traditional suppliers and contractors to register and pre-qualify with the procurement repository, with the Office of Procurement Regulation. So they were in a quandary. Do they abort the jury trial, or do they find another solution? The last thing we would want is to abort a trial. We all know about delays. People have been in remand yard for a very long time. There's a lot of litigation about delays to justice, and significant issues associated with delays in the administration of justice. So the last thing anybody would want is to delay a jury trial, abort it. So the Attorney General advised, based on a request from the judiciary, that a solution to this problem was the publication of an order exempting the judiciary from the Procurement Act for the purpose of procuring goods and services for this jury trial, in order to make sure that the trial was not abandoned or aborted. The Attorney General then advised me as Minister of Finance, because as I said, I am the instrument of the government who signs the order to do these things. So I was then advised by the Attorney General that an order had been drafted, the order was sent to me. And I was advised that I could sign the order, which I did, because I considered this to be a matter that was important in the public interest. I want to stress that all of this was done based on government decision and advice in writing from the Attorney General. Let's fast forward now to the recently concluded 50th anniversary of the establishment of CARICOM, the Treaty of Chagaramas, and the visit of the various heads of government, heads of state, the President of Rwanda, the United Nations Secretary General, the United States Secretary of State, a congressional delegation. All of that happened during the period July 3rd to about July 6th. Again, the Ministry of Finance was approached because many of these international dignitaries did not, and they would not normally confirm their attendance at an event of this nature for all sorts of reasons. These people are all very busy. I mean, the UN Secretary General, the UN Secretary of State, etc. Congressmen, the minority leader in the Congress, Hakeem Jeffries, and so on. These are all very busy people. So they would not confirm their attendance until close to the event. And secondly, for security reasons. In the case of the US Secretary of State, would not confirm his travel plans until close to the event. So in the case of the President of Rwanda, the United Nations Secretary General, the US Secretary of State, the congressional delegation from the United States, their attendance and the group that was coming with them, or the groups that were coming with them, because remember, this is a president of a country. It is the most important public official in the United States after the president and the vice president. The Secretary of State is the most important public official. And a congressional delegation, a very high-powered congressional delegation. These people would have teams coming with them, security, assistance, all that sort of thing. And the confirmation, I'm told, only came within 1 week to 2 weeks before July 3rd. So when these confirmations started to come in, the requirements for the procurement of goods and services became known, because prior to that, there's no confirmation. So you don't know how many congressmen are coming. You don't know how many aides are coming with them. You don't know when the Secretary of State is coming or whether he is coming. And you don't know how many security personnel is bringing with him and what his requirements are. You don't know when the UN Secretary General is coming and who is bringing with him until it's confirmed, and so on. President Obama, the same thing. So that when these requirements became known 1 or 2 weeks before the meetings, the 50th anniversary and so on, obviously you fall outside the 2-month requirement within the Procurement Act. And again, one had to make a decision, the government had to make a decision. Again, as I said, I'm the instrument, but these are government decisions. The government had to make a decision. If you comply with the requirements of the Act without an exemption, then you would not be able to host the 50th anniversary. You would not be able to host the US Secretary of State, United Nations Secretary General, the President of Rwanda, and so on. Because by the time you go through the 2-month process, the event is over. As I said, these confirmations started to come in towards the end of June, and the thing is in July. So again, based on a request to the Ministry of Finance, and I want to make it clear, the Ministry of Finance has not procured anything with respect to the matters relating to the exemption order for the judiciary or for the matters relating to the 50th anniversary of CARICOM and visits by all of these foreign dignitaries and so on. We in finance have not procured anything. The Minister of Finance is simply the instrument to carry out the government's intentions. So again, based on a request, and we certainly would not want to damage our international reputation. We certainly would not want to damage our relationships with our greatest ally, the United States, or with the president of Rwanda and so on, or the United Nations. You don't want to damage it. So you don't want to tell them, look, we have to cancel, we have to abort we can't have the 50th anniversary celebration anymore because we have issues with respect to procuring hotel accommodation, vehicles, meals, audiovisual services, all the various services that will be associated with a visit by a head of state, head of government, and a foreign dignitary. So again, in the public interest, the government made a decision that the Attorney General draft the requisite order and present it to me for signature, again with an opinion that I could sign the order. And I did so as part of a collective, but I also did so in the knowledge that the last thing we want to happen is to scuttle and abandon the heads of government conference and also the visits of these foreign dignitaries. So those are the facts, and I would now open the floor for questions.
Thank you, Minister. Before we proceed, media representatives are kindly reminded to use the raise hand feature and identify yourself before you pose your question. So the floor is now open, and I welcome your questions. Again, please use the raise hand feature so that I can acknowledge your question, please. Mr. There are no questions at this point.
I'm trying to raise. Sorry, I'm trying to raise my hand, but it's not working. Can I go ahead and ask a question?
Sure, Brian, go ahead.
Yes. Good morning, Minister. Priya Bihari is at pnews.com. So, Minister, would you say then that this order that was made is it invalid, and illegal because it has not been approved by Parliament?
As I said, I don't act alone. These are government decisions, and I don't sign anything, whether it is an order exempting almond milk from value-added tax or something like that, or whether it's an order exempting a charitable organization from customs duty on the importation of vital supplies. I don't sign anything unless I get the authorization from the Attorney General. The Attorney General is the legal advisor to the Cabinet. I follow the advice from the Attorney General. I don't advise myself.
So then, should I pose that question to the Attorney General?
I am sure that the media will pose whatever questions to whoever they wish, whenever they wish. That has been my experience. But I'm just saying to you that as Minister of Finance, I do not act whimsically or unilaterally. This is a government, and as a member of a government, a responsible government. We did not think as a government that jury trial should be aborted. We did not think as a government that we should collapse and cancel the 50th anniversary of CARICOM, nor should we cancel the visit of the UN Secretary General and the US Secretary of State, the President of Rwanda, and it is based on the advice received from the Attorney General that I signed the orders.
Thank you, Brian. Can we go to our next reporter?
Good morning, Renessa Cutting, TV6 News. Minister, you indicated that there was a fiscal surplus at the end of June.
Yes.
Are you able to quantify that for us, please?
Yes, $600 million. That's actually at the end of May. I said that at the end of May, we had data and then we had good revenue coming in for June. So at the end of May, the surplus was 600 million. That does not mean that we will end up the year with a surplus, because the last 3 months of the year, there's always a big push to expedite the public sector investment program. So we spend a lot more in the last 3 months of the year than we spend in the first 9 months of the year. But what I said was that I don't expect the deficit to be as large as it was predicted to be when I did the mid-year review. But it's too early to tell. All I can say is that at the end of May, we had a surplus of about 600 million. And I expect in June also, we were either in balance or slight surplus. I cannot predict what will happen by the end of September, but we can project based on trends that the deficit will be less than expected in the mid-year review. And there are two reasons for that. One is the revenues are a little better than we thought it would be, and then we are being careful in terms of fiscal matters.
Reporter. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning, Minister. Doris Polo here from Guardian Media. I wanted to ask, we understand that you weren't making decisions unilaterally, but would it not have been possible to bring the legal notice to Parliament before June 29th?
I don't think that was this is just my personal opinion. I don't think that was the intention of the legislature, that every time you're presented with a difficult situation, that you would convene Parliament, because these things can come up at any time. You know, no one can predict that the US Secretary of State would agree to come to Trinidad and Tobago. No one can predict that the President of Rwanda would agree to come to Trinidad and Tobago. So that I don't think it was the intention that every time we are presented with a challenge like this, that we would convene Parliament just to deal with this. There are other things that need to be done. You know, this law took a long time in its making, but it's quite impractical when you think about it. For example, look at that burst pipeline that WASA experienced, and the criticism of WASA and the Ministry of Public Utilities, that they took too long to deal with it. If they had to go through the process to tender out for equipment and materials and labor to fix that pipeline and take 2 months to do that, then you would understand that Port of Spain and Northwest Trinidad and the north of Trinidad would be without water for 2 months. No one could agree with that, because if the Water and Sewage Authority had said, okay, we must tender this thing out for a month and then have a standstill period of 10 days and then evaluate and so on, there would have been a loud condemnation of the Water and Sewage Authority and the government for not acting proactively and promptly. And no one rational person would think that when you have these kind of problems, that one would need to go to Parliament to create an exemption for situations like that. Situations like that occur. And the advice I'm getting, I'm thinking of a parallel, for example, with the provisional collection of taxes order. When a budget is read, at the end of the budget statement, normally all ministers of finance would announce the fiscal measures. And if within those fiscal measures, there is a change in taxation, you might either be imposing a tax or removing a tax, or increasing the personal allowance, for example, which you've done on many occasions, or exempting something from tax. In that system, the Minister of Finance is empowered within the budget debate to sign and issue a provisional collection of taxes order, which takes effect for 21 days. Because it is understood there may be some things that you can't announce beforehand, but you want to take effect immediately. Okay, let's say you're imposing a particular tax on something, or you're creating a concession for people, for example, with the importation of electric vehicles, which we did recently. These are things that you don't announce beforehand. You announce it on budget day, for example, right away. But you want it to take effect immediately. So that is the framework for the provisional collection of taxes order. But recognizing that the Parliament should get involved, that order has a life of 21 days. So one of the things that we're looking at, some of the advice I've received is perhaps we need to amend the Procurement Act to allow for a similar thing, so that if something occurs, the minister can issue a provisional order, which would then have a life of, say, 30 days or something like that, or 60 days as the case may be, and then the minister must return or go to the parliament and get that affirmed. But the idea that when something just happens, that you have to convene parliament every time, it would mean we be convening parliament every week to deal with, because these things are entirely unforeseen. You don't know when, for example, the electricity system for the country is going to break down. Let's take example that situation where you had that failure in South Trinidad where the country lost electricity, the entire country. You would not want, no rational person would want TNTech to go and put out tenders for 2 months to deal with that problem. You expect immediate action. And the same people who are querying this particular order for exempting the judiciary for a 3-month period, and I want to stress these are temporary orders, they are not intended to be permanent. Querying that would certainly have condemned the government and the judiciary for aborting the jury trial. I know that if that jury trial had been aborted because the government did not come up with a solution to that problem, the condemnation for aborting of the jury trial would have been 10 times more than the criticism with respect to these actions. Similarly, if the 50th anniversary celebration was abandoned, the condemnation would have been 10 times more than the critique. So to answer your question, you can't go to parliament every week to deal with unforeseen events. And this is why we are looking at various amendments to the Act. The other amendment we're looking at is a minimum threshold, because for 40 years or more, accounting officers like permanent secretaries had a limit within which they could procure goods and services without having to go through the Central Tenders Board, but they had to follow prescribed guidelines in terms of getting 3 quotes, not going over their limit, making sure it's open and transparent and so on, making sure there's proper evaluation, it's all equitable and honest and that sort of thing. But permanent secretaries over the years, their limit to procure outside of the Central Tenders Board was systematically raised until it was raised to $1 million about 15 years ago. So up to April 26, permanent secretaries could use a simplified procedure to procure important goods and services. For example, I'll give you a ridiculous example right now. To procure toilet paper, bottled water, photocopying paper, or even repairs to essential computer equipment, unless those things are within a more simplified framework, permanent secretaries and CEOs will have to tender that out for 2 months. So you could have a situation where the photocopying machine in a government ministry, a critical piece of equipment, is down, and you would have to wait 2 months to tender it out. So we are also looking at the well-established practice of a minimum threshold where there will be simplified procurement guidelines and rules. So that is the answer to your question, that as a government, we must act responsibly when we have a country to run, and we have to take decisions in the public interest.
Thank you. Reporter, please proceed.
Hi, good morning, Jens Levin, Newsday. Minister Imbert. Hello?
Yes, I'm here.
We're hearing you.
Yes, sorry. When was the invite issued to the foreign dignitaries?
The invitations would have been issued at various times. I'm not privy to that sort of information, but what I am privy to is information that I acquired this morning. I made sure to contact the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and ask, when did this UN Secretary General confirm his attendance? When did the President of Rwanda confirm his attendance? When did the US Secretary of State confirm his attendance? And when did the congressional delegation led by Hakeem Jeffries confirm their attendance? And I'm telling you, and I'm pretty certain of this, that those confirmations came within 1 to 2 weeks before the conference. You have to understand, when you're arranging something of this nature, you will get last-minute cancellations and last-minute confirmations. These things are not cast in stone. They are not certain, and you have to act swiftly because somebody may confirm, you may invite somebody a month before, but they may only confirm their attendance a week before, which is what happened in this case.
Thank you, reporter.
Now, in response to my, hello?
I'm here.
Hello?
Yes,
Jensen, we are
Jensen.
hearing you. Go ahead.
Sorry, there's a little breakup on my end. Hopefully you're hearing everything that I'm saying.
Yes.
In response to my colleague's question with regards to the procurement legislation being.
Oh, we lost him. I'm afraid we lost him.
Because I have to wrap up in about 5 minutes.
Good morning, Private Harry again, Minister. The 44th regular meeting of CARICOM was held in February in the Bahamas. Are you saying since then we didn't know that we're going to have the 50th anniversary celebration in Trinidad? In other words, at what point we knew that we were hosting the 50th anniversary, and therefore couldn't, the arrangements have been made?
I am surprised at that question because I have dealt with this issue twice in this press conference. And let me reiterate for the avoidance of doubt. You may plan an event 6 months in advance, but you don't know who is going to attend until a week or 2 in advance. And therefore you don't know what you are required to do in terms of provision of goods and services. So it is not that the 50th anniversary may have been planned a couple of months before. That is obvious. But I want to reiterate that when you are planning these events, you have no idea whether certain invited guests, distinguished personalities will be coming until a week or 2 before. And you also have no idea the size of their entourage, how they are coming, whether they're coming by commercial aircraft, whether they're coming by private plane, what sort of services. Because, for example, we received the president of Rwanda. That is a well-known African icon. He's been the president of Rwanda for 20 years. He's credited with all sorts of things. That confirmation only came about a week before. And you have to move swiftly now, having received the confirmation that this distinguished African politician is coming. You have to move fast. He may not have confirmed. He may have had other things to do. Similarly, the United Nations Secretary General, something could come up. A crisis could come up within the UN system and he may cancel. So he again would only confirm a week or 2 before. Similarly, US Secretary of State. War might break out in the Middle East and he might have to cancel. The offers go out, the invitations go out, but the confirmations only come in a week or 2 before. And when you get them, you don't want to embarrass the country. You don't want to say, all right, Mr. Blinken, we can't receive you because we have to tender for 2 months to provide for transportation and whatever else is required to accommodate the US Secretary of State. Similarly, the UN Secretary General, similarly, the minority leader in the Congress. So I want to make it clear that whether you know in advance that a foreign policy event or diplomatic event is going to take place is not the same as knowing exactly what you need to do, because you only find that out a week or 2 before. And this is traditional, this is historic. You can go back many, many years and you will see this is how these things happen.
Good morning,
let's take 1 or 2 more questions, please.
I would like to allow Joel Julian to.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
Joel, please unmute and proceed. Okay, we'll move on to the next question. Darius, go ahead.
Hi, Minister, can you tell us, are you going to report to the Parliament on the cost of the CARICOM meetings and the service providers who were used? I
am not the procurer of goods and services with respect to that matter. I made that clear at the beginning of this press conference that with respect to the exemption order for the judiciary and the exemption order for the 50th anniversary of CARICOM, the Ministry of Finance was not a principal actor in that event of those events. Those are other departments, foreign affairs, OPM, that sort of thing. I expect that there will be a statement. Of course, I'm sure a question will come from a member of the opposition or independent senator, as the case may be, and the government will certainly, we have nothing to hide with respect to these matters, certainly will report on the cost. I can tell you that the numbers I'm seeing in the papers are wrong. The numbers I'm hearing on the political platforms are completely in left field. My knowledge of this cost is that it's somewhere in the vicinity of $9 million on this. Okay, it's not 100 million, it's not 20 million, it's 9 million or less. That's my knowledge of this.
Thank you, Minister.
Hi, TV6 again. I have a question from Tobago. Elizabeth Williams would like to know if you have met as yet with the Chief Secretary on Tobago's budgetary allocation.
But that is not a topic for this morning's discussion. I would be happy to deal with that on a separate cover. Have we lost Joel Julian? I'd like to hear from him as the last media practitioner, or if not, there's one more question.
Joel, if you can hear us and you can unmute, please unmute and go right ahead. If not, I will move along to our last question. Jensen, you may go ahead.
Yes, good day, Minister. Again, two-part question, one piggybacking off the previous, my colleague Doris Polo. Why not then have, hello?
I'm listening, I'm hearing you.
Sorry, why not then have an emergency sitting of Parliament to deal with these issues prior to the commencement of the 50th anniversary of CARICOM? And the second part question, or my second question, is what assurances can you give now that this exemption, using my word here, loophole, won't be used in future or can't be used in future to circumvent the misuse of the legislation, where there would be procurement being done under shady practices?
Really can't answer a question that accuses me or the government of shady practices.
No, not accusing anybody, just but there can be.
I don't think I should allow you to ask me a question. That sounds like a question from an opposition member in Parliament. So could you kindly rephrase your questions, please?
Minister, I'd like to ask a question on behalf of Joel Julian.
Sure.
He's asking, we understand that emergencies will arise. What provision does the Procurement Act have to address emergency procurement?
The question of what is an emergency is very subjective. The single source or sole select can be used in an emergency situation. But again, who decides what an emergency is? So that to answer the questions that Jensen Levin was trying to ask me, but in a very strange way, the point I made is that you can't convene Parliament every time you have an issue. You can't just have an emergency session to deal with something like this. This is a very important matter, of course, but it is not a declaration of war. It is not a pandemic. It is not an earthquake that has destroyed half the country. One has to be very careful about rushing to convene Parliament with respect to matters of this nature. Secondly, I am taking advice, and the government is taking advice. The Attorney General is seeking advice. The Minister of Finance is seeking advice. And I'm sure other entities within the government are also seeking advice. One does not rush to make amendments to something as controversial as this procurement legislation. One has to get proper advice on what the amendments should be, because it would be a knee-jerk reaction to have an emergency session of Parliament to simply deal with procurement for a foreign affairs event. What is needed instead is a properly thought out, properly advised, well-drafted amendment that will allow the government to take action to deal with unforeseen events, and I want to stress that, unforeseen events that require immediate action, and then come back to the Parliament for ratification. That is the advice I'm getting. But that advice has to be properly fleshed out, and then it has to be factored into draft legislation. Then the legislation has to be examined, reviewed, and therefore it is the plan to come back in the second half of this year to make various amendments to the Act. I want to make the point there are 2 amendments that need to be made as far as I'm concerned, and maybe more. One is to allow the government to act in unforeseen situations, but subject to later ratification. And 2, to deal with the minimum threshold, because a simple thing as procuring food from a supermarket is now almost impossible, because many persons have not registered. And I just want to give some statistics now as I wrap up. I asked my staff to consult with the procurement office and determine what the statistics are with respect to entities that have registered with the procurement office. And so far, the information I have, the information I've received, if you just give me 1 second, I will pull it up now, is that 7,889 suppliers are entered on the system, but only 861 of these suppliers have been pre-qualified for all or some of their lines of business. 1,086 suppliers are pending pre-qualification, and 32,357 lines of business are pending pre-qualification by public bodies, and 1,017 lines of business were rejected for pre-qualification by public bodies. So when you look at these numbers, only 861 suppliers of goods and services to public bodies, which is the whole government, the whole state enterprise sector, statutory authorities, etc., government departments, only 861 suppliers have pre-qualified so far. And you would know that prior to April 26, there would be thousands, maybe 100,000 suppliers in Trinidad and Tobago, from micro, small businesses, medium, large, to government departments and statutory authorities and state enterprises and so on. So you have to understand, this is brand new to a lot of people, and many government departments are experiencing extreme difficulty because their traditional suppliers have not gone through the process of pre-qualification. And it's ironic that there was a clamor from the private sector, a clamor from industry, a clamor from the construction industry, from chambers of industry and commerce, a demand that this legislation be enacted as is, where is, don't make a single change to it. And we made some adjustments to try and make it more practical. We got criticized for that. And now, since April 26, the act has been proclaimed, but less than 1,000 persons have pre-qualified. So it means there are a whole group of people are now out of the system, can no longer provide goods, and they haven't pre-qualified for all sorts of reasons. One of the main being that in this procurement legislation, which was there from day one, when it was proposed over 10 years ago, was that in order to procure goods and supply goods and services to the government, you have to be fully paid up with your taxes. And there are many, many suppliers who are not compliant with their taxes and their national insurance contributions, and therefore are disqualified from providing goods and services to the government. And these are people who have been providing services for 20, 30 years, and basic things like water. So I just want people to understand this procurement legislation theoretically was a good thing. But now that it is rolling out, it is proving to be very, very difficult to get things going smoothly. And with those words, I'd like to thank you all for your participation. And I will have another press conference in due course when matters of public interest arise. Thank you.
That brings us to the end of this conference. We thank members of the media and the viewing public for joining us.